Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode. I'm sorry we've been away the last few weeks. Real life just keeps getting in the way. I don't know how else to put it. Just bear with me while I post links. And then we will be talking about ghosts. Brian, jangle the keys.
I can't find my keys.
A ghost stole them.
Yeah, they're floating around behind me.
If you see Brian's keys floating behind him, press 1. So, on streams of press 1 in the chat or press 2 in the chat. Why? And why? Just know the plan here. We'll kind of roll with it.
Seem to be having a little bit of connection issue.
Oh, even better. Here we go. It was not cooperating with me.
Can you hear me? Because your audio is going in and out for me.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and why? Oh, the internet hates us.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
you were very.
But it seems to be
choppy.
working now. Okay, so let's get this show on the road again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am, as always, your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am joined by my co-host,
Brian McKinley, author, vampire enthusiast, and general skeptic.
and godfather of vampire thrillers.
Yeah, well, that is what one person called my one novel. So,
And that's what you are, so own it. So we talk a lot on this show about demons and devils and other theological sorts of issues. But we decided to go back to a topic we haven't visited in a long time: ghosts, spirits of the dead, or maybe not. We'll get into that. But Brian decided to be clever and came up with some questions to ask me about the subject. We're going to go through those, and then we'll probably add to it on top of that. So, what's your first question for me, Brian?
okay, well, start with one of the easy ones. Um, are there different types of ghosts? And if so, what are they?
That's a good question. Um, I would say there are. What they are depends a lot on who you ask. A lot of people get, or a lot of ghost hunters will get very specific into apparitions and all sorts of various things.
Mm,
But generally speaking, the way I would classify them, because I can speak best about my own knowledge, obviously, is you have um, your mainstream ghosts, which are people that died and get stuck here for some reason. Sometimes it's the classic horror movie trope of unfinished business. Um, a very old reason that also links into vampire folklore is a body that's not buried properly. One of the oldest ghost stories on record, which comes from Pliny the Younger, is the ghost of a man trying to get his corpse buried with proper funeral rituals. That takes place in ancient Athens, believe it or not.
Yes.
So that's your main type of ghost. From there, you have two things that are very like ghosts, although you could argue they aren't necessarily ghosts. One are what are commonly called crisis apparitions. There are numerous accounts of someone under great stress appearing to a loved one. Usually, but not always, it's someone in a life or death situation. They're on a plane that's crashing, and then their mother swears they see them walk in the front door and vanish. More often than seeing the person, they'll hear them, like they'll hear them scream or something like that, and then they'll find out. Sometimes even when they look at the time, they can even tell down to the minute it's whenever the horrible thing happened. A related one to that are it's hard to think. There's a proper word for it, but I don't remember. It doesn't especially matter. But basically, it's very common that very shortly after a person dies, particularly within the first 3 days, people will see them. They'll talk to them, they'll interact with them, and then they seem to move on. So they're not traditional ghosts in the fact that they don't haunt, they don't stick around. But it's very common to see someone you were very close to right after they died, typically in the first 3 days, sometimes up to a year. More often than not, have them come to you in a dream. Now, there are numerous examples of this happening where somebody didn't know someone was dead, then found out later, yeah, they were dead when they saw them, which directly relates back to the second group. There is a concept in occultism that humans have multiple, they call it multiple bodies. You have your physical body, you have your ethereal or etheric body, which is kind of your mind and what it's thought that ghosts are made out of. Then you have your soul. So when your physical body dies, you need to shed off that mind, that temporary ghost body, before your soul can pass over to the other side. And it, again, according to occultists, this usually takes about 3 days. So that's the occult explanation of this. And again, the next group of ghosts that you talk about directly relates back to this one, which really aren't, because ghosts are spirits that hang around. But there's also spirits that come back. The Bible says, I mean, if you want to get biblical about this, and at points I do, because there's a common misunderstanding among Christians that the Bible says that human spirits never come back, and the Bible doesn't say that anywhere. But it does say, let me look up the exact verse. In Hebrews 12:1, therefore, because we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw everything off that hinders and the sin that so easily leads. Now, we're supposed to be surrounded by this being referred to as witnesses. You could argue that they're angels, but I don't agree. The implication seems to be that they're the spirits of people who've died and gone over, but still watch over us. There are endless stories of people being visited by loved ones. Not like, again, not a haunting, but years after someone dies, they see them again. You often it's again in times of great stress for the
Right.
this time for the person seeing them, and they're offered comfort. And then the spirit, and then they don't. They might see the spirit again, but the spirit again, it's checking in. A lot of people, many people who know someone who died, talk about feeling their presence, seeing them, hearing them. This is what I'm talking about. I'll give you an interesting example of this, actually. Father Joe, the priest I work with, who I've spoken of endlessly, talks about a man in his congregation. Old man, been with his wife many years, absolutely devoted to each other. His wife dies. And very understandably for somebody who'd been with his childhood sweethearts, he falls apart. And his children are worried about him. His grandchildren are worried about him. And he comes into the church one night and he just talks to Father about he can't take it. He's having a really hard time. And Father suggests that he pray and ask God for a sign. And the guy asked if he can go back to where they sat in the church. So he goes back and he sits where they had sat Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, both being very religious people. And while he's kneeling there in prayer, he hears footsteps go down the aisle, that's what I'm looking for, come down the pew and feels somebody kneel down next to him. And when he looks up, it's his wife. And his wife tells him, you've got to get it together. You need to take care of the kids. You need to take care of the grandchildren. And eventually disappears. And Father asked him, and he said, she didn't look like when she died, because when she died, she was very ill. She was beautiful. She looked like she was in great shape. It was as beautiful as he'd ever seen her. And the man got his stuff back together and started working. I would say those are your main types of ghosts.
Okay. Good answer. So my next question should be a little simpler, easier
Okay.
to answer. Um, are ghosts always tied to particular locations, or can they move?
Good one. And this is a common idea we've gotten from movies.
Yeah.
Um, no, they're not inherently tied to locations. Most ghosts haunt a specific place. Um, some ghosts do haunt people or families. Some ghosts haunt objects. This is, for example, a good reason why, if you like to go antiquing, if you're not sensitive, it's not a bad idea to ask a friend who is to go with you, because you don't wind up picking up somebody else's baggage. And that isn't always, I mean, that can be cursed objects and lead to a whole other set of problems. But sometimes you can also just get a ghost. There are lots of ghosts, even for that matter, that just simply seem to move around. Thomas Jefferson, for example, his ghost has been seen in another number of places, including a house in Philly that he had, as far as I know, no affiliation with. But objects there might have been affiliated with him. My personal theory, and I can't prove it, but it seems to fit the information that I have, is I think ghosts are limited by their own mentality. They tend to hang around a site that was very important to them in life, or an object that was very important to them. It's not that they can't leave it, they just usually don't.
In the world of darkness, we call those fetters.
Yes. And I'm obviously this is one of those things, and I said this to you before we went on air. And hi, Teresa Hall, who says that's her job on store visits. Yeah, from what I know, you seem like a good choice. But again, there's a lot of times I think here where I'm going to have to just tell you honestly, I don't know for sure. Maybe some of them are bound to locations and literally can't move, or objects or something of that nature but it doesn't seem like that's the case. So that would be my best guess.
Okay. So here's an easy one for you.
Okay.
What are the most effective ways of getting rid of ghosts, and why do you think they work?
Actually, funny enough, ghosts are a lot harder to get rid of than demons.
Oh,
Uh, It is. It isn't a. It isn't a question of power levels. Because the thing is, Because this is a common question people ask: is how do the dead come back after judgment? Part of the answer to that, in my opinion, is that souls that go to heaven aren't forced to stay in heaven or even to go to heaven if they're not ready. God, in His mercy, allows them to stay and allows them to come back. Souls that go to hell, sometimes as part of being tormented, are dragged back by demons and used in houses haunted by demons. But specifically, with ghosts that have, the other type of ghosts, the most common type of ghosts, which are good people who died, who just aren't ready to accept the fact they're dead for whatever reason, and what have you. They have free will.
hmm.
You can't make them leave if they really don't want to leave. One of the most effective things you can do with a ghost is read the prayers for the dead. Even sometimes read the last rites. And sometimes that can help them move along. But a lot of times, there's not a whole lot you can do if they really don't want to go.
Huh. That's interesting. Because, yeah, usually most people think like a blessing or something like that, throwing some sage around or what have you.
Which isn't when you're dealing with a negative spirit, those can be good tactics. Although, for the love of God, don't use sage if it isn't part of your belief system. Um, I have nothing against sage. Don't get me wrong. It's part of a number of religious traditions. It's perfectly effective. But symbols have power because you believe in them. If sage isn't part of your belief system, it's gonna do more harm than good. So Chris Palermo says 1980s Tampa Bay, Florida area hurricane season changes the whole area atmospheric pressure. Sensitives as grade school children see ghosts about everywhere. SBC love to prey on them for seeing demons. Not sure what the SBC is. Oh, Southern Baptist Church. Uh,
Mm.
Again, there's nowhere in the Bible that says that ghosts are all demons. In fact, there's a story of the witch of Endor in First Samuel, where it says that this witch summons up the spirit of Samuel. And I've had many people try to tell me that it's a demon disguised as Samuel. And it's like, it doesn't say that. It says it was him.
Okay. So,
Yes.
here's a fun one for you. Uh, what kinds of things can ghosts actually do that you've seen or heard from reliable sources?
Um, they can visually appear from time to time, move objects. Though, one of the ways to see the difference between ghosts and demons is scale. When most ghosts move objects, and I've heard reports of exceptions to this, but generally speaking, it's something small: teacups,
Hmm.
plates, cups. Things within about 10 pounds. Where demons do things in the hundred, know, throw refrigerators across the room, and things like that. Things
Right.
that a full-grown adult human would have trouble moving. Um, they can certainly make sounds. They can make themselves heard on recordings and appear in photographs. Um, they can do smells. I know the first haunted location I ever investigated, which was the Logan Inn, one of the 5 oldest continuously operating inns in the United States. Among many ghosts, it was haunted by the wife of the former owner who loved to make things using Lilac? Yeah, that was it.
Hmm.
So people would often smell lilac even when there was no reason to. To this day, I believe.
Okay.
Um,
So the follow up question. This is where it gets into the theoretical, which is
mhm.
fun for me.
That's
practically
always fun.
practically speaking, how do you think ghosts can actually do these things? Since it's really hard to, like, we have almost no evidence of people being able to do these paranormal things. So why do you think ghosts can do it?
That is an incredibly good question, and I prefer to stay with I don't know because every time I've heard a paranormal investigator try to explain this with quantum physics or gravity or magnetics or relativity or anything else, they
Hmm.
sound like a giant idiots. And I am mature enough in my thinking to say I don't know. There may be an explanation somewhere in physics, but I'd rather ask a physicist than make a guess on my
Okay.
own.
Fair enough. I didn't expect you would have
No,
a
it's a good question, but
huge
it's
answer for that.
any answer I can give you. Feel like an idiot saying because I'm not good at math, so I don't know a lot of physics.
Yeah, me neither. But I always like to try to tie things to the real world and just think, okay, how would this actually be accomplished? But
If you get online and look up parapsychologists, you can find. Oh, actually, this is a good segue into talking about something I left out earlier.
okay.
So there's a really interesting theory about ghosts that I think is sometimes true. And this is something I like to bring up because people will say, well, like yourself, Brian, you're an atheist, or at least an agnostic, leaning towards atheist. So how can a person not or believe that God does not exist and believe in ghosts?
Mm, yeah,
It
exactly.
seems like to a lot of people like a contradiction. But parapsychology, which is the branch of psychology that deals with psychics and ghosts and things like that, did actually offer a theory, which is known as stone tape. And the theory is that certain highly emotionally charged events can be recorded um, in some way we don't entirely understand. Usually thought to be recorded particularly in quartz crystal or granite. So you get a lot of it with granite because granite has quartz in it.
Okay.
Um, it's thought this explains a lot of haunted house experiences because somebody will hear it. There's stories of houses where at 12 o'clock at night, people hear a loud boom in the second floor back bedroom. Then footsteps run down the hallway, down the stairs, and out the front door, and they hear the door slam. The door never slams. No one's ever seen running through the house, but you hear the same sequence of events every night at the same time over and over and over again.
Hmm.
Or you might only hear it once a year on the anniversary of the murder, or when certain events come into play. And it's not what you're dealing with here isn't a ghost in the sense most of us think of. There's no personality there. It's a recording of a series of events. This is also sometimes used to explain why ghosts seem to walk through walls. Well, yeah, the event that originally happened, the wall wasn't there at the time, so the person just walked through it. There's also an instance that originally made people think of this idea, where um, on a certain old Roman road, they would see Roman soldiers marching,
Hmm.
but always cut off around knee level. And what they eventually found out is the original road had changed elevation over the years. And where the soldiers got cut off and what could be seen matched up with the original height of the road.
Hmm.
And again, there's no interaction with it. It's just this image of soldiers marching down the road, almost like a videotape,
Yeah.
except in 3 dimensions. So we had a question from chat, although I do believe I know the answer to this for you,
Oh,
which is that Teresa Hall wants to know if you've had a ghost experience.
I have not. I have never encountered anything, and the one or two times that I've been with Kevin in the attempt to do like a ghost recording or anything like that, it always seems to be those are the times it doesn't it doesn't happen. So I don't know if it's my bad vibes or something are interfering with the ghost's ability, or some people have theorized that, like, well, if you don't believe in it or you don't want to see it, you won't see it. I've heard that offered, or like I said, maybe
I think we
it's
just haven't found the right spot yet.
yeah. I'm
We tend
like,
to do,
honestly,
yeah.
ghosts kind of like bother me in a way that most other things don't. The idea of actually seeing a ghost kind of is somewhat disturbing to me. Has been ever
Hmm.
since I was a kid. So I'm not 100% sure I really would want to, even if I had the opportunity. I'm not sure what it. I'm not sure whether it would kind of
I mean,
break
there's
the
ways
whole.
we can arrange for you to see a ghost,
Yeah, it's like
but you're not going to want to do it,
it could
and that's
break the
okay.
spell. It could break the spell, and suddenly I would just be like, oh, okay then, and then I'd be fine with it, or I could freak out and it could
It could.
break my mind.
I mean, the obvious first thing I would do if we really wanted to get you to have an experience, and I haven't suggested this yet because I know you're not looking to see something, as it were, is we run you through the same test I put every first investigator I work
Hmm.
first time investigator through. We take you out to a cemetery that I know is active and make you stay alone in part of it for an hour.
Nah.
If there's something to see, that you'll see it.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's not something you're going to jump at the idea of doing, and I know it.
Yeah, I'm not really. I mean, just my personality. I'm not one of those confront your fears kind of people.
Fair enough.
Sad to say. All right, so I got there's only two more questions.
Okay.
Uh, the next one kind of follows the other one. Are there things that ghosts can't do that are often attributed to them?
Um, Mostly it's more of a scale than anything else. They can move objects. It's not as big and dramatic as you see in the movies. Um,
Okay.
One thing that's very interesting is, can ghosts possess living humans?
Right.
Um, for a very long time, I would have said no. I never thought that was ghosts.
Mm.
I always thought it was a demon in disguise. I know from talking to Father Joe and from reading accounts from other investigators that I respect, I now believe I'm wrong about that.
Oh.
Although I will say I've never seen ghost possession. I accept that it may exist, but possession, and as I've said more than once on the show, ghost possession in general isn't common.
Mm.
Certainly, people can be very, and I think it's more common, much like it's demons. The
Mm.
ghosts tend to influence people more than actually control them,
Okay.
because you can watch people move into a haunted house, not a demon, an actual haunted house,
Yeah.
and they'll start to act. They'll start to have new habits they never had before. Their sleeping patterns will get weird. They'll develop phobias they didn't have in the past. And sometimes, if you do a little bit of research, somebody who died in the house, what they're now experiencing matches up with. um, which again is more of a influence or what we call oppression
Hmm.
than a possession.
Okay,
Um,
but so not the kind of big stuff that you attribute to like demonic activity with like
yeah.
things running down the walls and you know
Um,
big
in
big
my
crazy
experience,
stuff.
no. There are a lot of those ideas like apports, making things appear out of thin air,
Yeah.
come from the seances and spiritualist movement, and people thought ghosts could do these things. Oh, there's an obvious thing that a lot of people associate with ghosts
Mm.
that isn't really a thing, and I can get into why. Ectoplasm.
Oh.
So a lot of people have this notion that ghosts are made of something called ectoplasm. Um, Case in point, in 30 years of being a demonologist and ghost hunter, I've never been slimed. I don't know anyone who's ever been slimed. Um, so where does ectoplasm come from? Well, it comes from the spiritualist movement. Back in the 20s, 30s, spiritists would produce this glowing, airy, membranous substance. You can find pictures of it all over the internet. Sometimes it would look like someone's face. Sometimes, it'd be this big blob of material with someone's face in it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would make more particular forms. A very crazy case involving a very famous medium by the name of Marjorie would produce a foot. It was all very impressive, and that's where we got this idea that ghosts are made of ectoplasm and associated with ectoplasm. And it's a load of horse manure. Every example of ectoplasm that was tested, it's cloth. The Marjorie's foot was eventually tested by J.B. Rhine, who's a fantastically important figure in the history of parapsychology. We should probably do an episode on him.
Mm.
And it turned out it was chicken liver and a couple of other things. Ectoplasm, as far as any example I've ever seen, read about, it's a magic trick. It's not something associated with actual ghosts. There are undoubtedly investigators that would disagree with me, but going based on the evidence, going based on my own experience, that'd be the big one of no, this isn't a thing.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
So
Hopefully.
the last one is kind of the big summary. You mentioned kind of some of this in your first answer a little bit, but I figure I'll get the specific answer. Um, why do you think ghosts exist, and do they serve some kind of a purpose?
Okay, I'm going to give an answer to this, but let me preface what I'm about to say, both for you and for our viewers, with the fact I'm going to delve more into in my personal theology than I normally like to do on the show,
Sure.
because I really can't answer the question any other way.
Yeah, I kind of figured it. It opens it opens up
It's
to
a
that.
really good question.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's well established by now that everyone knows I believe that there's life after death. The vast majority of people go beyond. They go to heaven, they go to hell, they go to Valhalla. I'm not, I've never been to the other side, so I don't know that much about what's there. Some people aren't ready to go. I think the reason that ghosts exist is because God is merciful, and that when people aren't ready to move on, He doesn't force them. Um, I've dealt with trying to get ghosts out of places from time to time, and sometimes it's letting in a little bit of God's light and helping them realize earthbound spirits, which is another way of saying ghosts, in my opinion, with very few exceptions, are not damned souls. There are people who are going to a better place who aren't ready to go there. So my philosophy of how to try to cope with a ghost in your house, not a demon, not a fairy, not the multitude of other spirits that are out there per se. Because I'll come back to that in a second. There are more things than ghosts and demons in the world.
Future episodes.
But and there's more I want to say about it in a minute. But I want to finish this thought.
Sure.
But one of the ways to get rid of them, like we were asking about earlier, really, is more reassuring them about what comes next is going to be better. And I absolutely believe that earthbound souls, the ones that you're trying to help move on, they're off to better things. They're off to the streets paved in gold and a dog on every corner and all the happy, wonderful things we think of as heaven or the positive side of the afterlife. It's helping them understand that helps them move on. God loves them, wants them to join him, but he won't make them. So I think that's why ghosts exist. I think nearly all of them eventually figure it out because the thing you'll run into is hauntings end. Most haunted houses, it may be haunted for hundreds of years, but as time goes on, activity gets less and less and nearly stops. Why exactly that is a really interesting question. The late brilliant musician V. Nigel Taylor once opined when I was on a panel with him that to all things there is a season. Maybe that's true of ghosts as well. That eventually their time comes and things continue on. Teresa Hall says, "I do think some of them stay to watch over their loved ones. Talking them into letting go can be very hard. It's so moving when they do." I agree, Teresa. I think one of the reasons, like I said, they get stuck is because they want to watch over. They want to see, especially I would expect parents who die when their child's very young may want to stick around to see them grow up. Of course, helping them understand, it's like it's not. The pearly gates are not a one-way door. You can come back and see the people you care about. Is probably a way to help them with that. But yeah, I think hopefully that was a pretty good answer.
Yeah.
And not too religious for people.
No, it's kind of about what I expected. I didn't expect a scientific answer from you.
I don't think there's. I think it'd be hard to give a scientific answer to that particular question. Okay, actually, I'll make an attempt. Because why not? The universe is generally considered to be made up of matter and energy. In fact, matter really is just energy in a different state.
Right.
If we presuppose, and I will grant this is a presuppositional argument, but if we presuppose that thought and memory and mind exist, they're not really matter. I mean, there's no denying that the mind and mental activity are directly linked to the brain.
Right.
But they're not, I would argue they're not exactly the same thing. They just have a tight relationship where one directly interacts with the other. And I'll circle back to that in a second. But if we accept that the mind exists and isn't just a byproduct of the brain or some weird function, entirely just a physical function of the brain, that would lead one to the argument that the mind is a form of energy since it's not a form of matter. When we have so far not yet discovered a way to measure. And if that is true, we'll have conservation of energy. Energy cannot be created nor can it be destroyed. it has to go somewhere.
Right.
And that would be as close as I can come to a scientific explanation of ghosts. And that would be and please, if any atheists or physicists are slapping their heads and going, he really doesn't get this. I'm making a very elementary. I don't understand physics very well. So try not to be too hard on me. I will say one of the interesting questions I've been wrestling with, which I got from watching atheists, is if we take the mind and the brain, or the soul and the brain, if you will, as two different things. What about someone like Phineas T. Gage? For those of you who don't know, Brian, do you know who Phineas Gage is?
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, in the 19th century, a man by the name of Phineas Gage was working on a railroad when an TNT explosion drove a railroad spike through his head. And he survived. Now, the common thing almost everyone's heard is how he completely had a dramatic change in personality.
Yeah.
Went from being a very nice guy to a very violent one. So the question that has been proposed, and is an interesting question, is so did the soul change when the personality changed? Turns out Gage is actually a bad example of this, and I'll come back to that in a second. But when you look at traumatic brain injuries that cause memory loss and dissociative identity disorder, where someone develops altered personalities, it's an interesting question. Although there's an argument, certainly as in psychology, that dissociative identity disorder isn't true multiple personalities the way that people think. It's a form of extreme disassociation.
Yeah.
So it may very well be, no, you're still dealing with one mind, one personality, one soul. The thing that's interesting about Gage, and I just wanted to add, is so I find this whole thing fascinating, and just doing is like, okay, let's look up that story. Because the minute they mentioned, because the person who was watching didn't remember his name, it's like, oh, that's Phineas Gage. Let me look up and see a little bit more about what happened. Yeah, a lot of modern medical doctors and a lot of people who've looked at actual medical records say that the personality changes are greatly exaggerated. That to some extent, it seems like it's a difference of the way the media chose to report something and the actual science behind it, which are not throughout history and today, including today, are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes some sense anyway. When you think about an accident like that, they had no understanding at that period of time of the brain's response to trauma, PTSD, things like that could explain personality and mood changes. There are physical malfunctions in the brain or damage that can, mess with someone's impulse control and make them more, fly off the handle, more prone to violence, things like that.
So. A ton of weird and interesting things like that. And there are a lot of questions in the way that, the brain and the soul relate. There's no denying that if a soul exists, it's deeply connected to the brain. I think it's just, there's no evidence. Souls are mostly supposed to be thought and memory, and that essential part of us other than the physical flesh. And I think the problem we run into here as well is that we're starting to go way past any even basic grasp of science I have into a subject that is very much a question of philosophy and the nature of identity.
Yeah.
To to add fuel to the mess, because there's a question, particularly one of the more interesting brain surgeries that they very rarely these days do, which is when they sever the two hemispheres of your brain. Because the thing you run into is when someone's having a seizure, it'll start on one side of the brain, it'll cross the barrier to the other, and it'll go back and forth. And each time it passes, it gets bigger and the seizure gets worse. So in really severe seizure cases, sometimes they would cut the brain, but literally sever the connective material between the sides of the brain. You can still function with this surgery, but it gets a little weird.
Yeah, because there are parts that require both hemispheres of the brain working together.
But there's also, in the way that the two sides, because one side of the brain handles our ability to visually recognize something. One side of the brain handles speech.
Mm.
So they can hand a person, blindfold a person, or cover one eye, I should say, and show them a spoon. And they can say spoon. But if you ask them to pick from a box of cutlery, they have no idea.
Mm.
If you show it to the other eye, they'll be able to pick it out, even just by touch. But they have no idea what to call it.
Yeah.
Because those two parts of the brain can't communicate with each other.
Yeah, it is interesting how the brain is wired together. I also remember I did a paper based on a book that I read about brain, the way the brain's connected. And apparently there are differences in male and female brains for the most part in terms of how the wiring is done, how the parts connect, and how much are used. So that's kind of interesting that that there are biological differences there.
Well, there's a really fun thing there, which doesn't relate to any of this, but I still think it's fun and fascinating, so we need to share it. Which is, yes, male brains are structured differently than female brains. Again, different, not better or worse. But people have wondered and done the brain scans to determine, so what are brains like in homosexual men versus heterosexual men? The same for women. And yes, brain structures in some homosexual men are different than in heterosexual men.
Yeah.
What's absolutely fascinating about this is it's exact opposite of what a lot of people assume. Homosexual brain structures are more masculine. Not more feminine. They're actually even more so with male structure.
That is funny.
And yes, in the transgender sense, you can be born biologically male with female structured brain and vice versa.
Yeah, that would make sense, and that would be a strong argument for a biological basis.
So Chris, another comment from the chat, Chris Palermo says, old saying, you have to suffer a little death before you see the dead. Life flash before your eyes is NDE. We're that close. I don't think you need to die to see the dead or have a little death. Children in general, for example, tend to see ghosts a lot better than adults can. I will say there's certainly a fair amount of anecdotal evidence that people who've had near-death experiences, or particularly people who have gone through the last rites, tend to be even better at seeing the dead. And there's a whole bunch of other factors that people born on certain days, people born with a call, they're supposed to make you more able to see ghosts. I actually used to know a guy who was
Fox said in The Frighteners Sometimes a
Yeah.
brush with death can alter your perceptions.
Yep. Great movie.
It is. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Peter Jackson on point. Michael J. Fox on point. If you
It's
haven't, folks, if
it's
you
the
haven't
reason
seen
the
it,
Lord of the
watch
Rings
Frank.
movies exist.
Yeah, because it was so successful, they were willing to give him the shot.
Well, and also they bought so many computers to do that movie that they realized when it was done, okay, so now we've got all these computers to do all this computer animation. What are we going to work on next? And that sparked the idea of trying to adapt Lord of the Rings, and it kind of led down the road to Weta doing that.
Yep.
Yeah.
If anyone doesn't know, and we're going to have to wrap up here in a minute because it's almost 9 and the streaming is going to cut off. But if you don't know, Frighteners is a horror movie starring Michael J. Fox as a scam psychic who can actually talk to ghosts.
Yes.
And
the great Jeffrey Combs.
Yes, also brilliant. I don't want to go
one of my favorite roles of
brilliant.
His. Yeah, it's one of my favorite roles of his. He's so messed up in that movie.
Which one is Jeffrey Combs?
He's the FBI agent.
Oh God,
Hammers. Yeah,
he is so good.
Yeah, it's a great performance.
Yes, absolutely, 100% agreed. It's like I know I know who you mean. I just couldn't remember the name.
Yeah.
But I do think that's going to just about wrap it up for tonight. We are coming up near the end of our hour mark, which is when the stream cuts off. And better to say goodnight before live streaming has ended.
Yeah, because then it looks...
I want to thank Teresa Hall and Chris Palermo, who were kind enough to join us in chat.
Yeah,
and I know that other people have been listening because I've seen the numbers going up and down. So if you have listened tonight, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of ghosts. That's going to do it for tonight, though. We will hopefully be back next week to talk about something. Actually, here's a good thought. And we should put this on our Facebooks as well. Tonight, Brian got to ask me a bunch of questions. How about you guys? How about our listeners? What do you want to know?
Yes.
If you go to the description, you can find my email address, kevinm.paranormalencyclopedia@gmail.com. Email me any questions you have for me or Brian or both of us, and maybe we can try. Once we get enough of them, it may not be next week, but once we have enough of them,
viewer questions.
Yep.
Episode.
But that'll be it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kevin Mears, demonologist of Paranormal Encyclopedia, saying have a good night.
Brian McKinley saying keep your fangs sharp.
And God bless everybody. Hopefully see you next week.